Ma, ¿podemos llevar a Javi a su casa?
Claro.
¿Podemos llevar también a los gemelos, señora Delgado?
¿Y por qué no?
¿Y a Noah, señor Delgado?
Seguro.
How about Ignacio, Mrs. Delgado?
Obvio. Entre más mejor. Pero los botines sucios y los balones de fútbol los ponen atrás.
Yeah, no problem. We got it.
Vive a lo grande, con asientos para tus hijos y los amigos de tus hijos. En la primera Grand Highlander.
I never did anything to harm my daughter or my granddaughter.
The test is about to begin. Please remain still.
Oh, man.
Casey Anthony's Parents, the lie detector test. Watch now, only on A&E. And watch next day on the A&E app.
For exclusive podcasts and more, sign up at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And on this episode, this Texas Ranger was famous for getting confessions and closing cold cases. Did his unorthodox interrogation techniques land innocent people in prison? We'll discuss the latest season of Smokescreen. Just say you're sorry. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband and love of my life, Kevin Flynn. Hello, executive producer Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca, the host.
Also with us is private investigator, certified pet detective, resident cat lady, and author of the Piper Green series of cozy mysteries, the one-day licensed bartender, Laura Bricker. Hello, Laura.
Hello, Rebecca. And if anyone else in the great state of New Hampshire wants me to be their guest bartender for the day and they're a nonprofit, hit me up. I will be glad to get that license again.
That's right. We need some dirty Shirleys over here, Laura. And finally, our resident Doubting Thomas, the author of the City Trilogy of novels, host of Strange Arrivals, and our Patreon Deep Dive Book Club podcast host, Toby Ball. Hi, Toby.
Hi, Rebecca.
All right. So, Kevin, this is obviously Thursday's podcast.
Obviously.
What is coming up on Monday's show?
So starting on Monday, we're going to be beginning our summer schedule, and that means we're kicking off Monday with the new series from Max. It's called Jared from Subway.
We've been talking about that for weeks.
Yeah, and if you are on Patreon, you would have seen us already record that in a live broadcast where we, everybody got to see each other yell at each other and make jokes about Jared that probably didn't make the cut, but it'll be a good discussion.
Maybe I even showed up with a $5 footlong.
Oh my
for that
goodness!
Taping.
A $5 foot.
Wouldn't that have been weird?
A $5 footlong. I mean, usually Viagra is more expensive than that, isn't
it? Have you guys ever eaten do you guys like Subway?
I do like Subway. Yeah.
What's your favorite?
I like the BMT.
What's that?
Oh, what people think BMT stands for bologna and no, it's
bologna.
Well,
gross.
The BMT is the Brooklyn Manhattan Transfer, right? That's a subway, so that's why they named it that. It's named after a famous subway in New York.
All right. So for the record, Kevin, I looked it up. The Italian BMT is thin slices of Genoa salami, pepperoni, and ham, all of the cured meats, together with processed cheddar cheese.
I don't get it with cheddar.
What do you get it with?
I get it with provolone. Or it's been since the pandemic since I've been in one, but I think they have spicy, maybe a pepper jack or something like that. But okay, I don't get American cheese.
So the last log line after processed cheddar cheese is, it'll just melt in your mouth. I like the meatball.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to get anything. I mean, the meatballs aren't good. But if I'm forced to have a Subway, I'm going to get the meatball.
Yeah, all those times where I dragged you in by gunpoint saying,
"Oh no,
have a sandwich, Rebecca,"
or maybe a tuna. It's one of those things where sometimes work will just be like, "Hey, usually it's Panera or whatever." Mm-hmm. I'm doing an edit next week, and it's we're bringing in boxed lunches for everybody. Do you want a turkey, a tuna, or whatever, and it's always like Panera. So I'm like, or like the Works. I'm like, just get me a tuna, whatever. But sometimes accidentally it's like Subway, and I'm like, shit. I'm like,
accidentally.
Just get me
How is that an accident?
Yeah.
Because that's what somebody's like, you know.
Oh, I called the wrong number. I thought I was getting pizzas.
No. Because like whoever's doing it, like that's where they know to get sandwiches from. So that's where they get the sandwiches from. And I'm like, oh shit, we're doing Subway. Just get me the meatballs. It's innocuous, you know?
Yeah.
Do you guys have a Subway go-to?
I don't do Subway.
I haven't been to Subway. I mean, I always go for like a BLT, like bacon, because I'm like, you can't fuck up bacon too much.
The bread is weird and sweet. That's why I don't like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway. Sorry.
By the way, I think that there's not a lot of talking about the sandwiches.
Yeah.
In this documentary,
No.
Jared from Subway.
I also don't think we're going to be getting Subway as a sponsor anytime soon.
Seems unlikely.
After my quote, the bread is weird and sweet. Yeah. Although, Subway, if you are willing to change my mind, I will take some of your Subway sponsor money. Just saying, I could be sold.
I just got a text from Quiznos.
Okay. I think it's time to get the content in and not talk about Subway anymore. But I am looking forward to that documentary and talking about it. So, Kevin, should we talk about the podcast we're talking about this show?
I think you should lead off.
All right, let's go ahead and drop that first clip right now. Leading off.
Law enforcement, I was always taught and was raised, and the way I understood it was to trust them. They're there to help you. But now that's a totally different ballgame.
When a Texas Ranger asked Larry Driskill if he could help solve a cold case, he agreed to talk to him. But Ranger James Holland accused him of killing Bobbie Sue Hill in 2005. After 2 days of intense interrogation, Driskill wondered if maybe he did do it and walked into a confession.
Does that sound like what happened? Hypothetically?
Hypothetically, I guess it could have, but I just don't know.
Was it self-defense or did shit just get out of hand?
If anything, it would have had to been self-defense, but I can't remember.
Holland is revered for his talent at getting confessions, even though he uses questionable techniques like deception, suggestion, and forensic hypnosis. Did the detective known as the, quote, serial killer whisperer ensnare an innocent man?
Of course, when you report on these kinds of cases, you constantly question yourself. No one wants to be the journalist who naively believes the story spun by a killer. But then I found another one of Holland's cases, which also features a questionable confession and involves some tactics even more shocking than the Driskill case.
In the latest season of Smokescreen called Just Say You're Sorry, host Maurice Chammah asks what happens when suspects are convinced they can't trust their own memories to defend themselves. It does a deep dive into Holland's interrogation of Driskill, as well as those of other suspects subjected to his unorthodox questioning style. Spoiler alert, we are going to be talking about plot points from Smokescreen, Just Say You're Sorry. So if you want to remain spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes for our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews. So Laura, are you looking forward to getting arrested when you're in Texas or questioned when you're in Texas?
Neither, especially if the Texas Rangers have anything to do with the interrogation and the questioning. I mean, and I think that obviously we talked about this in our last review when we talked about how to create a sex scandal and what happened in that case with child suggestibility. And now in this case, we have something, I don't know if we're going to say worse or whatever, but more prolific in Texas Ranger James Holland, who is just absolutely determined to get his man, regardless of what he has to do to basically just get them to say they're sorry and confess. And it's really, I mean, we hear 3 different instances, they call him the serial killer whisperer, 3 different cases in this where he is the interrogator and that, are pretty questionable. And did we watch a documentary about the Little case? I feel like we did. Like we watched something this is like one of Kevin's quiz shows. But again, that
wasn't about the Little case. It was about the other Texas Ranger case with the most prolific quote serial killer.
Right, Henry Lee Lucas.
Henry
Where they were like
Lewis,
bringing the guy like all the food and they're like, you want some food?
Yeah.
It's called the confession killer.
Here's some Subway. Will you confess now so you don't have to eat another Subway sandwich?
All I can remember is that they just talked about they kept talking about how bad his breath was. And they just kept bringing him like shakes and stuff. Yes.
Strawberry milkshakes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cigarettes.
Yes.
Yeah. So no, it's just the way that this guy questions people. I was like, oh fuck. It's a defense attorney heaven in Texas if you want to go there, I guess. But what the hell is going on with the Texas Rangers?
But Kevin, the Texas Rangers are supposed to be elite, right?
They are. One Ranger, one riot, or
one
whatever.
One riot, one Ranger.
Actually, I think it's a pretty cool slogan.
It's cool if they're actually elite.
I'm sure that guy who got off the train back in 18, whatever the fuck it is, he was probably a badass guy. But yeah, it just seems like
Chuck Norris is elite.
Yeah. And the Lone Ranger. Don't forget the Lone Ranger was one of the Texas Rangers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was left for dead after an ambush, and that's why he wears a mask and, all that other.
Yeah, he's kind of problematic, to be honest.
His sidekick, Tonto, and
yeah.
Yeah, okay, so we'll just say it was a different time. And let's just move on to, the problems of today with the actual Rangers. Yeah, I mean, there was the point that I think you're trying to make is that they are sort of revered by law enforcement and by the public. And so when they come in, there's like a special order, like, oh, it's the Rangers. It is like the Green Berets of that police department. So
it's like bringing the SEALs.
Yeah, so you're like, oh, well, this must be a very important case. This is a very important member of law enforcement. So what they're doing must be right. It must be, on the side of goodness and justice and blah, blah, blah. And so that gives you cover for actually being incompetent. Although, because you get all these arrests, I guess that's good enough.
Yeah. What do you think about the Rangers' techniques that we hear about in this podcast, Toby? Because they do spend, I think, the first 2 episodes really talking about Holland's. I mean, this really is about this one specific dude, ostensibly, right? And they spend an awful lot of time talking about, the title of the podcast is Just Say You're Sorry. The Smokescreen is obviously a series that we've covered before. Fake Priest was one series. We did another one, Kevin.
Oh, it was the Miracle Cure.
Yeah. And this is obviously about this dude, Just Say You're Sorry, the Just Say You're Sorry dude. So we hear an awful lot about his particular techniques. What are your thoughts about his particular techniques and the way they're broken down in the show, Toby?
So I think the show does a good job. It's not super efficient, but it does do a good job of talking about these different things he does, including this whole thing about hypotheticals where you start, I think he compares it to that OJ book, If I Had Done It, but he tries to get people to walk through okay, so if you did do it, how would that have looked? And on these sort of marathon interrogation sessions, again, this is something that we've seen a lot. You can go back to the Central Park 5. It's you just wear people down and they're eventually willing to say whatever. So he kind of guides them in this way. Forensic hypnosis, using that in 2014, that's a legitimate technique, seems insane.
Michael, if you would imagine that there's a single grain of sand resting on the very top of your head as it spreads slowly across the top of your head, and it leaves you with almost the feeling of a warm hug from a loved one.
It's hard to see how we're going to get from this feeling of a warm hug to questions about a violent abduction.
3, 2, just completely letting go. 1.
I think it's an important topic. He does a pretty thorough job of looking at things like memory and how suggestion works. And it's something I sort of explored in Strange Arrivals as well. So I'm kind of familiar with what's out there that you can talk about as far as this stuff goes.
Can I ask you an interjecting question about forensic hypnosis?
Yes.
What did you think when Maurice, our host, told us that he wasn't going to play us much of the forensic hypnosis tape because he didn't want us to become hypnotized while listening to it?
That seemed... I made it all the way through Dr. Dante without once being hypnotized. I feel like I'm pretty much immune.
That's why I don't do television. I don't want people to think I'm too sexy.
Toby Ball, you will go to the subway, Toby Ball, and you will order the BMT.
No, I will not. Yeah. So anyway, I thought that, the first couple episodes are a little languid in their pacing. but I thought the information was interesting.
Yeah. So, Laura, this whole idea of if I can get you to apologize for a thing, that is like basically getting you to tacitly admit that, oh, you did it. So just say you're sorry. Laura, just say you're sorry for being late to the taping tonight. Just say it. Say you're sorry, Laura.
I'm sorry, Rebecca. I'm sorry, Rebecca.
You obviously murdered somebody earlier tonight, Laura. You obviously murdered somebody.
Why I was late.
I knew
I murdered somebody. Yes,
I knew it.
And I needed to cover it up before I
Did the smell of pizza make you bring you back to?
Oh my God, that was crazy. Does the smell of this Domino's pizza in particular make you remember the night of the murder?
Your olfactory memory.
So now Holland tells Axe to focus on the flavor of the pizza. We're nearly 5 hours into the interrogation at this point. It's late into the night.
1, I'm trying to remember. 2, I'm glad you like this pizza. It's helping you though. No, that's nasty
I'm
shit.
here for you. I'm here for you.
That's nasty.
I'm brothering stuff right now, man.
They didn't cut it like this back then though.
It's brothering stuff right now. I'm helping you to remember. Taste that crust. Smell it.
Kevin, what did you think about that technique of just saying, like, it's very gaslighty, right?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just say you're sorry. The prompt is so problematic. In isolation, it could be taken as a confession on its own, right? You know, if you're smart, like, you don't say, I'm sorry, even after a fender bender for all sorts of, insurance reasons. You don't say it there. It certainly can be misconstrued as an admission of guilt. Maybe the fender you busted was, a drunk driver. You don't want to take the whole fall for that. Here, it's also used as sort of the first step towards getting the suspect closer and closer to an admission. And then when you combine that with these techniques about undermining your own faith in what your memory is and starting to supplant those memories with suggestions on top of all the other issues here, like the deception and things of that nature, just by saying, if you get them to say, I'm sorry long enough, I mean, they're going to break and sort of believe this idea themselves that they did something that they need to be forgiven for.
It's so funny you should say that, Kevin, because I'm sorry legally is problematic. It's problematic in employment situations. It's problematic, like if you fire someone, you're not supposed to say I'm sorry. Because that implies like that you're not supposed to be. But also, like, I'll never forget this. I used to work in a retail store, like in the 1990s, and a woman kind of hilariously, just visually, walked completely full bore into our glass window that was like between like the hallway and like our shoe display, where there was very clearly a shoe display, and she just like walked into it like she wasn't paying attention. And my instinct as like a 20-something was to just be like, I am so sorry that she was just like on the floor. She was so embarrassed. I'm like, I'm so sorry. People do this all the time. Just to make her feel better. Guess what? She fucking sued the store and like got a settlement because I literally said the words, I'm so sorry. This happens all the time.
I think that this happens all the time was probably worse. But
no,
yeah.
I literally was like, I was only saying that to make her feel less embarrassed. Of course it didn't happen all the time.
Yeah, it's problematic in low-stakes situations.
This was cell phones. She wasn't even looking down, dude. She walked into a window with writing on it. For God's sakes, lady. To this day, I'm still like, how did that happen? How did that happen? Anyway, but yeah, you shouldn't say I'm sorry.
No, you shouldn't say you're sorry for, like, wanting to get paid for your art on Patreon.
Yay! Now that is a good transition.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Right.
You did one that wasn't tacky.
I almost walked into the plate glass window of commercial success there.
Nice job.
Look, we'd love to have you on Patreon.
Even Toby doesn't look embarrassed this time.
Toby never looks embarrassed. He's just perpetually annoyed by us.
Yes.
So over on Patreon, just go to patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia. You can get all sorts of great stuff there. You can get ad-free and early episodes of all these crime writers on shows you'd already know right now if we were thumbs up or thumbs down, because you would have gotten this episode as soon as Rebecca hit save on the file. Also, we have for you there the Crime Writers on After Show. We have Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcast. Toby, what book are people should be reading right now so they'll be ready for your next episode?
The Stranger Beside Me by Anne Rule.
Classic.
Oh, that's a classic.
Classic story about Ted Bundy.
Wow.
Holy shit.
It's a lot of pages, a lot of words.
A lot of words.
Who's going to be the guest for that one?
Yeah, so discussing this is going to be Lauren Bright Pacheco. Claire Clark, who is
Dr. Claire Clark.
Exactly, at Trinity Dublin. Maybe you'll see her in Ireland, Kevin.
Well, if you're listening to this on Thursday, I'm there right now, yeah.
Yeah, and then Alex Segura.
Wow, doing an Anne Rule book. It's a classic.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's so it should be good.
If it weren't for Anne Rule, none of us would be sitting here, just saying. Well, maybe like you probably would, Toby, but the rest of us would not. Okay, so Kevin, what else?
We also have Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast and our Married with podcast where we dish out advice.
I have something new coming up on Leave It to Bricker.
Oh, do tell.
Well, an attorney in Exeter, my little quaint AF town, recently argued successfully a case before the U.S. Supreme Court and won.
Oh, wow.
And I was walking on my rage walk around town the other day, and I saw all these signs on their window. And not only is this an attorney, she's the organ player at my church.
Wow.
So we know I'm getting the story about this whole thing.
That's
All
so
right.
quaint.
Yeah.
And the organ player at Laura's church successfully argued a case in front of the Supreme Court. That is the quaintest fucking thing I've ever
Isn't that the craziest thing you've ever heard?
Yeah.
No, it's
I was
just
like-
very Exeter. It's very, very,
It's very
Exeter. It's very
Exeter,
on
yeah.
brand.
Also, we have the latest episode of These Are the Stories out. We're looking at one of Rebecca's favorite crazy episodes of SVU. It's called Shattered. This is the one with Sharon Stone, where at the end there's a standoff and Sharon Stone picks up a woman's dead child
Oh my
and
God.
walks it over to her
That one!
and hands it to her to end the standoff.
Oh my God, that episode is bananas.
Yeah.
I love that episode so much.
He's my son! You bastard!
Sophie, put the gun down.
No, you put yours down, or she will die! Everyone will die!
All right, Kevin, before we end the business section, do we have any Patreon patron saints of the week this week?
Our Patreon patron saints are Allison Godfrey and Melanie O'Halloran. Bless you.
Bless you, Allison and Melanie. Bless you, everyone who supports us on Patreon, and those of you who don't. You're cool too, although I wish you would consider it because it's super fun back there behind the paywall. And thank you to everyone else who muscles their way through the business section every week. I know it's tough, but y'all do it, and we really appreciate it. Kevin, does that end the business section?
That ends the business section.
I'm going to fade the music out right now.
Ma, ¿podemos llevar a Javi a su casa?
Claro.
¿Podemos llevar también a los gemelos, señora Delgado?
¿Y por qué no?
¿Y a Noah, señor Delgado?
Seguro.
How about Ignacio, Mrs. Delgado?
Obvio. Entre más mejor. Pero los botines sucios y los balones de fútbol los ponen atrás.
Yeah, no problem, we got it.
Vive a lo grande, con asientos para tus hijos y los amigos de tus hijos. En la primera Grand Highlander.
I never did anything to harm my daughter or my granddaughter.
The test is about to begin. Please remain still.
Casey Anthony's Parents, the lie detector test. Watch now, only on A&E. And watch next day on the A&E app.
The friendship is sharing deal. Because I want one of your McNuggets.
And I need some of your Quarter Pounders.
There's a deal for everyone at McDonald's. Get one favorite like 10-piece chicken McNuggets, a Quarter Pounder, or a Big Mac, and get another for just $1. Price and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
So, Kevin, I didn't get your thoughts about the forensic hypnotist.
Oh, what the actual fuck with this? I mean, what's next? The forensic witch doctor? Yeah, so what did I want to say about that? Okay, you got the forensic hypnotist, you got the smell of the pizza.
Yeah, what's the deal with the smell of the pizza?
I think he's just trying to, like, trigger your senses and try to get your memory. Now, it's one thing if you're doing that with an eyewitness, you know, and you're just trying to... Maybe, you know, I mean, I don't know how like effective like that would actually be at getting actionable, credible information. I think it just is like another step on this path of just like getting you to confess, right? And getting you to incriminate yourself, you know, bringing you back. You know, maybe you're the kind of killer that's going to get emotional having to think about it again and you put it behind you, or You've just buried it so deep that you want to fight and you're going to like get verbally tripped up. I don't know. It is good at getting people to say things. Is what he is good at that. And I'm sure that he has arrested, he's gotten people who are criminals to confess to things that they have done, but he also seems to be very good at getting people who have no business being questioned to also say they did things they didn't do.
Yeah. So I want to talk about that hypnosis thing a little bit because testimony from witnesses that are being hypnotized is not allowed in most places, but apparently in Texas, it is. So it's still allowed in Texas. And that crazy hypnosis thing leads to a description. The vehicle description changes. And then the sketch artist modifies this sketch based on this. And then this sketch goes out. And then lo and behold, somehow that leads to Larry Driskill. So
the dude's that looks like the handyman who works on the house next to us. Okay.
Yeah. It's just fucking bonkers. But forensic hypnosis.
Also looks like Booger Red.
Yeah.
What the fuck? And again, Texas is the home of true crime. We have so many true crime writers in Texas and authors that write true crime books. And it's because Texas crime is fucking bonkers. And apparently Texas, what is allowed to be admissible in Texas is also fucking bonkers too.
Okay, let's just be fair for a second. Texas is the second most populous state in the country behind California. So you can also say California is the home of true crime. I think most of the cases we cover and everything on the show are either from California or Texas, to be fair. So let's just be clear on that.
No, I'm just saying, Texas has all the crazy cases like the cheerleader mom death and Catherine Casey, the true crime writers from Texas.
Sure. So Toby, one of my criticisms of this podcast, which I'll talk about in my review, is that it does go over some very well-trod ground that we've heard about in tons of other reporting and tons of other podcasts, including things like the Reed technique, including things like, oh, wow, police are allowed to lie to suspects, yada, yada. But in the final episode, the host talks to a woman who basically is like, what is your take on how the use of these tools? And she's like, well, I would hate to take the tool of lying to suspects away from cops because even though it is misused a lot, it is also used to catch bad guys. And I would hate to take away, these other techniques away from cops because they're also valuable tools. And, I really do think juries are getting smarter. And if only defense attorneys were better.
I have seen that tactic work in a lot of confessions where I believe the person confessed legitimately. We had corroboration and they were ultimately convicted, and I believe that was a righteous conviction. I'm not saying it doesn't happen where there's false confessions because they were tricked. We've seen that. But to take that tool away from law enforcement, I have a hard time with that.
The couching over and over and over again just made me want to, throw myself off of a cliff because none of these things are, in my opinion, true. What if no cops were allowed to lie to no one ever? Because that's how it is in other countries, right?
She goes even further and says, I think police now, because juries are smarter and will see through this, that police are incentivized not to use these techniques against people who are more prone to be fooled by them.
Yeah.
And
bullshit.
It's what the fuck are you talking about?
Bullshit.
So what you're saying is that police are going to not use techniques against the people they think they're going to actually work against. That's not going to happen. She kind of posits this perfect situation, right? Where every defendant is going to get a vigorous and competent defense in the courtroom. And this idea that these indigent people who get roped into making false confessions or even real confessions under these techniques are going to have the kind of representation that's going to be able to pull in experts to be well, he admitted to it, but this is why you shouldn't take that seriously. Hearing that somebody admitted to something, despite the fact, I think that in true crime circles and our listeners and that affinity group is pretty clear now about false confessions. I'm not sure that that's sort of widely understood. I feel quite certain in Smith County, Texas, if you confess to something, you're probably going to be convicted based on what we listened to earlier this week. You know, I think it's the best you could come up to kind of defend the practice, given that it's just opening the door for nefarious activity on the part of police that would be legal.
Yeah. So there are limits in other countries about what the police can lie and lie not about. So for instance, in the UK, the police cannot lie to a suspect in order to make them believe they have evidence that they don't have, or that evidence is stronger than it is. And guess what?
What?
It's fine.
It's fine.
They still catch bad guys there. Like, they're not like considered to be like a country where, like, you know, so many bad guys are running around because the police can't lie more.
Yeah, and this whole, you know, kind of discussion about like, well, it's okay to have this faulty tool in place because, well, jurors ought to be able to, you know, see through it, and attorneys ought to be able to argue against it and make people, like, if cops themselves cannot bring themselves to believe that they've made a mistake or that people might confess to something that they didn't actually do, how is the public supposed to believe
right
that? You know, it's just, and again, it's just sort of passing the buck, like when they arrest the wrong person, they say, the jury got it right, or it's the jury that convicted him. You know, again, it's just passing the buck. It's no one's taking responsibility for their place in the broken system.
Yeah. I mean, I just keep thinking of like the Jason Carroll case in the season of Undisclosed and in Bear Brook season 2. Like, Roland Lammy, before arresting Jason Carroll and Tony Puff, interviewed other people that he also thought were guilty. The same, like, the other people could have been Jason Carroll. This guy, George, who like was just like, no, and like walked out. And that's the only reason why that guy's not in prison today. Right?
Yeah.
Because the same shit didn't work on him as worked on Jason Carroll. It's like...
Right, and there's the guy in this podcast, the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. And it's like, if it doesn't work on you, it doesn't work on you. But if it does work on you, that means you're guilty. Like, it's crazy. And like the idea that like a jury would discern that, because, I mean, there's so much data that shows that juries believe that if someone has been brought to court because they've been arrested and haven't made a plea deal and their case has gone to trial, there's, quote, good reason for it and they're probably guilty. Like, that's what jurors actually believe, right? Like, if all this time and expense and like they've been pulled out of work and everything, like they're already biased towards guilt anyway. I mean, I found that entire section of the podcast, and the fact that it was, I don't know. I mean, one of my big criticisms of this generally is that so much stuff is not interrogated more. And that was one of the things that was not interrogated more, was that just like, this woman was like, yeah, but, and it was just like left to lie there. And I'm like, no, but like, that's just not how it is. So Laura, what did you think about the case of Chris Axe? That was the other case that was sort of looked at in this podcast.
So Chris Axe, he was somebody that was under investigation for a murder. And again, this Texas Ranger interrogates him, and eventually the case is dismissed. And this is really dismissed because DNA evidence comes in and shows that he wasn't a contributor. He wasn't in the DNA that was found on the victim's clothing. And in fact, that DNA matched the original suspect in the case.
Right.
So again, this is somebody that ends up confessing, and it is, again, at the interrogation techniques of this Texas Ranger. So I think it was interesting. I mean, I don't know if it was necessary. Like, I feel like for me, this podcast narrative sort of meandered a bit sometimes. Like, I think this is a really interesting issue. These Texas Rangers, particularly this Texas Ranger in particular, and how he handles suspects of crimes and how he's getting these false confessions. So yeah, it was another one in the string of false confessions. And it was one that obviously had quite, not just somebody going to prison, but somebody potentially going to their death.
Right.
A lot of times we discredit DNA, but in this case, thank goodness for the DNA, because look what happened, but also look what happened after all these years based on, scientific evidence versus sketchy interrogation techniques.
But even in that case, if I'm remembering correctly, the DA or authorities were like, yes, but we can't definitively say he didn't do it. We can only say we don't have enough evidence to continue pursuing.
Right, exactly. So basically the DA issued, so this was the case. So 97, this woman never comes home. She gets out of her job at I love it, the movie store. Remember we had movie stores where we got videos?
Yeah.
A white van that is later tied to this guy, Paul Scott Taylor, who is actually the person whose DNA comes back, is seen in the parking lot. And then this woman's body is found, et cetera, et cetera. But eventually they focus on this guy, Taylor. But then, it's a cold case. And then that's where our dear friend, Texas Ranger Holland, comes in back in 2015 to reinvestigate the case.
Years later, yeah.
And this guy, Christopher Axe, initially says, yeah, he had been with this girl. But then that just goes all off the rails. And the next thing you know, hypothetically, if you did it, hypothetically, if you did it.
He was a moron. I'm dead serious when I say that. It takes a certain kind of stupid to focus on just one person instead of looking at facts. And that's all he was doing.
I see.
And I'm sorry, I'm not going to pull punches when it comes to this guy. I refuse.
I, appreciate when we're investigating cold cases. And I know in New Hampshire, Kevin's done a lot of work on cold cases in New Hampshire. You've had a big interest in that. And sometimes that quest to solve the case, especially years later when memories change and memories fade, doesn't always lead you to an accurate conclusion.
Right. I just have one final question, because the podcast does explore one thing, which is the effect on victims' families when exonerations happen later. After cases like this. And, we talked to the relative of a victim who says that, her loved one's case, her name wasn't even included in later reporting. It became the case of the people who were exonerated. And I'm interested to, just hear your thoughts on that thread. Because I find myself in some ways sort of pulling back from that, because very often it's law enforcement themselves that sort of bring the victim's family to the point where they can't change their mind about the conclusion of a case. And so that when an exoneration happens, I don't blame the victim's family for being pissed about it, but the reason they don't believe it is because law enforcement is the reason why they're so sure of it.
Right. But also in this case, she comes around to realizing that, yeah, these two guys didn't do it, especially when they had somebody else that they arrested.
Right.
But she comes to, be resentful of the fact that all of that she was told, what they believed, was, not a lie necessarily, but that it wasn't the truth.
Right.
And that they had sort of placed all their emotional energy into a narrative that was not what really happened. And I don't think any of us begrudge the family of any victims when we say, oh, but the person they arrested was the wrong person. I don't think we begrudge them their pain or their dubiousness about that, because they want justice for their loved one. But justice for the loved one does not include railroading the wrong person.
That's right.
Right? So emotionally, do we have to kind of walk a bit of a fine line there that I think we could say shit about the cops and their bad techniques and the prosecutors that are not using proper discretion, and even the judges that are tilting the tables. But for the families and stuff, you have to let them have their feelings, and whether they're supportive of that or not, that's sort of different, right? But a family member who still thinks that this guy is guilty or never thought this guy was guilty, that doesn't really move the needle on what actually happens in court very often, other than if the family might influence a prosecutor to maybe dial something back. But, in general, just going to let, the families feel how they want to feel. But it was very interesting to hear from this one woman about her family's experience and sort of the change in feelings, because it becomes an emotional roller coaster. You think one thing and you find out something else.
Well, she's talking too about media coverage specifically, how the name of the case is.
Yeah.
Here's how I think about it, right? People get upset because they call it, quote, the Adnan Syed case instead of the Hae-Min Lee case.
Right.
They are two different cases, really. There's the Hae-Min Lee case. Hae-Min Lee was murdered. If you believe, as I do, that Adnan Syed had nothing to do with Hae-Min Lee's murder, that is the Adnan Syed case because he is the victim of a system too. They are two separate cases, right? Their cases are entwined, but they are not, to call it the Heyman Lean case, like it's like they're two different things.
Yeah, but sometimes it is. I mean, we call it the O.J. Simpson case. Very rarely do we call it.
It was the state versus O.J. Simpson.
Right. But no, I'm saying in our shorthand in the media and in the public consciousness, we call it the O.J. Simpson case.
Right.
Right. So they're not wrong about that.
And not the Ron Goldman case.
Right. Yeah. So they're not wrong about that.
Yeah. No, I agree. No, that comes up all the time. But I think in terms of exonerations, it's an interesting issue in particular.
Ma, ¿podemos llevar a Javi a su casa?
Claro.
¿Podemos llevar también a los gemelos, señora Delgado?
¿Y por qué no?
¿Y a Noah, señor Delgado?
Seguro.
How about Ignacio, Mrs. Delgado?
Obvio. Entre más mejor. Pero los botines sucios y los balones de fútbol los ponen atrás.
Yeah, no problem. We got it.
Vive a lo grande, con asientos para tus hijos y los amigos de tus hijos, en la primera Grand Highlander.
I never did anything to harm my daughter or my granddaughter.
The test is about to begin. Please remain still.
Casey Anthony's Parents, the lie detector test. Watch now, only on A&E. And watch next day on the A&E app.
The friendship is sharing deal. Because I want one of your McNuggets.
And I need some of your Quarter Pounder.
There's a deal for everyone at McDonald's. Get one favorite like 10-piece chicken McNuggets, a Quarter Pounder, or a Big Mac and get another for just $1. Price and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
All right, let's do what we do. Let's let our listeners know, should they check out the podcast Smokescreen? Just say you're sorry. Laura Bricker, what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs down for this podcast?
So I am going a mild thumbs down with this podcast. I think this is an issue that really needs to be brought out. I think this is a really important issue. I think that we've got the Innocence Project, the Marshall Project. We've got really important people involved in this. I just feel like the way that the story was told and the narrative was structured didn't have the impact. I got lost a lot of times in this podcast. I actually listened to it twice on my cross-country travels across the state of New Hampshire this week. And I was frustrated by that because I feel conflicted because this is something that we should be talking about. And this is obviously something that, really reputable wrongful conviction groups are involved in. But unfortunately for me, the way that the story was told, I just didn't really enjoy. So that is a mild thumbs down.
Toby Ball.
Yeah, it's a tough one for me. I guess I'd give it a thumb sideways. I kind of agree with Laura in that I don't think it was told in the best possible way, given the subject matter. I mean, part of it is, we spend a lot of time on things that people who listen to a lot of true crime podcasts probably have experienced, like have heard about or kind of know about. And I think it's fine to touch on that stuff and have like a little bit of it, but I think they kind of dwell on it quite a bit. I think there's more sort of interesting stuff. Like when Holland is in, I think, California, and he's trying to look into this serial murderer and stuff. I thought that had the potential to take some of the time away from this sort of more sort of deep dive into forensics and memory and stuff like that. Spend more time with that. I thought Jillian was an interesting voice. We didn't talk about this in the main review, but I thought she was a good voice to give some context to him. So why he's not just like a complete laughing stock or whatever. So all this being said, I thought there was a lot of stuff to think about. I don't think it was put together the way I would, or the amount of time apportioned to different aspects of things necessarily reflected what people who listen to much true crime or watch true crime would come in with knowledge of. So I guess, yeah, so it's a thumb sideways. I mean, I didn't mind listening to it, but if this had been made 4 or 5 years ago, I think it would have felt sort of more revelatory than it does now.
Kevin Flynn.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a thumbs up. I thought it was told in a solid way. I did appreciate it was a deep dive into one of these cases and sort of showing the problem with this one particular person of law enforcement. Again, if you've listened to any kind of true crime, then the read technique and its problems is not anything new to you, I don't know at what point we can start saying, okay, that we shouldn't be telling audiences about Reed, or that they should assume walking into it that they already know all about that. I think the point is supposed to be to raise awareness of the issues with the Reed technique. So I can't disagree that this might not be revelatory for most true crime listeners. I did appreciate the way that Maurice signposted certain things when they're happening, where it was Reed technique, and actually where it went way beyond the Reed technique. In the end, it's called Just Say You're Sorry. It's the police asking the defendants, the suspects, to say they are sorry. But, the people that need to say they are sorry are the police officers in the system. They just need to say they're sorry for creating situations that are very likely to ensnare innocent people and get them to falsely confess to murders they did not commit.
Okay, so I hate to say it, but I'm a thumbs down on this podcast. I would have loved a podcast that was made in part by the Marshall Project. I'm a huge supporter of them and their work. However, when I was listening to this podcast, I just kept thinking, have the people who made this podcast never listened to any of the reporting that has been done in this medium in the last few years before? There's nothing new or interesting or revelatory here. Not only that, but the case itself at the center of it, I'm sorry, it's a very low stakes case. At the end of the podcast, you actually find out the stakes are just not high at this particular moment in time. They're not. But I have to say, and it's disappointing. As somebody who participated recently in helping edit a podcast that included a lot of Reed technique stuff, and my huge warning to the people making it was, all of your listeners know a lot of this. You have to do it in a new way that they haven't heard before. This podcast went in absolutely the opposite direction. I did not hear anything in this podcast that I have not heard dozens and dozens of times, except this was slower. And so I just have to say, it was difficult to listen to. I found myself kind of dreading listening to the next episode. And it wasn't just that it wasn't new. It was just plodding and slow. And I agree with Toby. The most interesting part happened later with Jillian. I maybe would have started there and had that be the kickoff to the narrative, because that was the only time in the podcast where we sort of got a fuller portrait of the man that's ostensibly at the center of this. And yeah, I can't give it a thumbs up. And I regret having to say that, but that's where I am on it. So thumbs down for me for Smokescreen. Just Say You're Sorry. All right, that's going to do it for us. But before we go, Laura Bricker, do we have a cat of the week this week?
We have a developing story this week.
Oh, no.
Oh.
One of our longtime regulars, Tony Flanagan, is considering adopting a dog.
Wow.
Now, we don't know what's happening with the dog. It's introduced to Lola, her other dog. We're waiting to see what happens. But Angela Buster is lobbying for some name suggestions for this dog and is hoping it will be called Rankin, as in Bill Rankin.
Hi, I'm a dog. Can I go outside and pee?
Oh.
Do you know my butt tastes like deliciousness?
Oh, my God. If you sniff me, you get to know me better.
Come here, I can sniff your butt and know what you had for dinner.
Oh, no. Now, somebody else wants the dog to be called Toby.
Oh.
But, so Rankin, Toby, what is the dog going to be named? And will Tony get the dog? Tune in next week on Crime Writers On.
Oh, nice.
For the update.
Nice. All right, Laura Bricker, folks want to reach out to you and submit their animals, real or future or imaginary, to be Cat of the Week. How can they find you on social media?
They can find me at Laura Bricker.
What about you, Toby Ball? How can you be found online?
At Toby Ball NH.
Kevin Flynn, what about you?
I'm at Kevin P. Flynn.
You can find me everywhere at Reb Lavoie. You can find the show everywhere at Crime Writers On. And please join our incredible Facebook discussion group. It is robust. It is inclusive. We never have to kick anybody out. Well, maybe once in a while, but rarely, because everyone there is so rad. Just go to our regular Facebook page. I've pinned a post there that points you to the group. Get episodes early and ad-free at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia. You'll also get the Crime Writers On After Show, Married with Podcast, Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast, and Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcasts. Our theme song was composed and performed by Ty Gibbons. Our line editor is the wonderful Livy Burdett. The executive producer of this program is Kevin Flynn. This show was recorded in the Treehouse Yoga Studio above the Mockingbird Cafe in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi studio, otherwise known as Studio C, the closet in our New Hampshire basement, where I also will spend several tense hours trying to get Kevin to just say he's sorry.
Nope, not gonna do it.
How did this sweater shrink,
I'll
Kevin?
never do it.
How did the sweater shrink,
I'm
Kevin?
not talking.
Just say you're sorry.
I'm not talking.
Just say you're sorry.
I was someplace else.
On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you
later.
I have to say that, what's his puss here? Hold on. I have to say that James Holland, what's his puss? I had his name written down so I didn't forget it. Are you going to make it, Rebecca? Look at Rebecca. She's like,
I'm sorry. I just took a sip of my hot cocoa just as you said it was his puss. And all I could think about was cookie puss. All right, say that whole thing again.
Okay.
En Crime Media. Ma, ¿podemos llevar a Javi a su casa?
Claro.
¿Podemos llevar también a los gemelos, señora Delgado?
¿Y por qué no?
¿Y a Noah, señor Delgado?
Seguro.
How about Ignacio, Mrs. Delgado?
Obvio. Entre más mejor. Pero los botines sucios y los balones de fútbol los ponen atrás.
Yeah, no problem, we got it.
Vive a lo grande, con asientos para tus hijos y los amigos de tus hijos, en la primera Grand Highlander.